expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJS, board, staff, or underwriters.
Good day. You are listening to Ability Radio. I am one of your hosts, Amelia Headley LaMont of the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands. And today we are most privileged to have a guest who I've known for many years. Her name is Paula Whatley Matabane. She is a retired professor of the Howard University School of Communications. She is also the director of publications for the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. She's also a spiritual director and an ordained itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Good day, Dr. Matabane. How are you?
I'm fine. And just let me say that I also retired from being director of publications.
Okay. All right. So, there are certain skill sets that will not die, right? As a result.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Very important stuff. I had a conversation with you a few days ago, and there were some things that you had mentioned that I thought our listening audience would find of most interest. And that is your grandmother, a woman by the name of Ione Davis, also known as Willie Lee, you said?
Yeah.
And she wrote a book called This Way Leads Home. So tell us about your grandma.
Well, first of all, it's a memoir that she wrote. She hand wrote it in 1948. My grandmother was born in 1881 on a sharecropping farm with her parents and grandparents who were emancipated slaves. Mm-hmm. And this was in South Georgia. Mm-hmm. And if you know anything about South Georgia, that was what they call the Black Belt because of the rich black soil. And it was like the cotton center, of Georgia. Mm-hmm. Those counties were very wealthy. And you had the proliferation of enslavement in that area. And so that is where she was born into at a very difficult time when, for those who know American history, Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. Mm-hmm. And the program to help elevate the newly freed people was put on the back burner. It was betrayed and ushered in these violent white supremacy governments at the state level. Mm-hmm. And then they had sharecropping, which I don't know if people in your audience are familiar with that.
Well, explain that. Yeah, explain what do we mean by sharecropping?
Well, kind of like a tenant farmer, like you sign on with a landowner and he gets the bulk of whatever the crop is. He gives you the seeds and some, food and all that. But then he deducts that from the value of the crop that you bring in. Plus he gets his cut. Mm-hmm. And that system essentially left the sharecroppers, who were almost not all of them were Black, but it said 90% or something, some high number. Mm-hmm. It left them impoverished because the landowner charged whatever they wanted to charge. And the sharecroppers did not have the right to go to other stores, buy products. And you were living on their land, in their house, so, it was quite close to slavery. It wasn't slavery, but it was close to it in terms of the economic outcomes. Wow. So, but anyway, my grandmother wrote this memoir in 1948. I did not know about it until 1980. And when I got it, my mother had never, didn't know that it had been written of. She did. She had totally forgotten. Mm-hmm. And it's a long story as to how I got the document. But I think it's a more interesting story as to when and where and why she wrote it. She was, as I said, she was born and raised in Georgia, down there in South Georgia, in, the country. But in 1901, she had the opportunity to go to the big city of Columbus, Georgia, which was about 80 miles north of there, but it was a city. And she went as a live-in nanny for this wealthy white family.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process, going to church, she met my grandfather, and they got married and had 6 children.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he was actually born a slave. He was older than her because he had been married before. And he was born during the slave era, but he was a teacher. So he had like finished 10th grade. Because at that time, Georgia did not have any public high schools for Black students.
Mm-hmm.
For a Black student to go to high school, they had to go to a private school. And of course, if you were a sharecropper's daughter, you were not
anywhere.
going. No.
Yeah.
And my grandmother only finished like 6th grade,
Mm-hmm.
These rural one-room schoolhouses. So she didn't have a whole lot of education. And that's why I found it even more amazing that somebody with a 6th grade education could write their memoir.
Right.
And it's very well written. She wrote it. It's handwritten by her. It's not published. Like, that's what I'm working on, publishing it.
Mm-hmm.
But she wrote it in 1948. And this is like the research that I did. Like, okay, so she was in California when she wrote it. She was in California because one of her daughters had moved to California at the end of World War II, seeking a better way of life, trying to get away from Jim Crow, racism in the South.
Mm-hmm.
And she asked her mother to come out to help her because she had a son and she was divorcing her husband. There's a whole lot going on.
Right.
And so my grandmother went out there, but there were things that propelled her to go that I would like to talk about that I think could be of interest to your audience.
Mm-hmm.
The war ended. The men came home from overseas.
Second World War, right?
I'm sorry, Second World War. Yeah, 1946. Okay. That's when they were coming home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the state of Georgia, you had the Democrats and the Republicans, but at that time, the Democrats were the conservative, ultra-right wing party.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike today, it has flipped, and that's another whole historical thing we don't have to talk about. But just know that the Democrats were the right wingers, and they had that's where you had the Ku Klux Klan and all that were in that party. And so they would have a primary election, and they declared that it was an all-white primary election, that Black people were not allowed to vote in the Democratic Party primary.
Wow. Okay.
And they could vote in the general election, but the Republicans did not stand a chance of election in Georgia at that time. And so you had to vote on the person that the white people, if you were Black and you were going to vote, you had to vote on the person that the white people had chosen. You didn't have the opportunity to choose.
Because you couldn't vote in the primary.
Right. So in that same year, 1946, in March, this Black preacher named Primus King had challenged the all-white primary, and he won in the Georgia Supreme Court. And the primary election was going to be held in late June. So there were 3 candidates. 2 of them were former governors of the state, and those 2 men were staunch Ku Klux Klan supporters. And I assume people know about the Ku Klux Klan.
Oh, yeah.
Ultra-racist group, violent. The third man, and I can't remember his name right now, he was a moderate.
Okay.
So when the primary election went, Black people voted in large numbers, and the moderate won the popular vote. But he did not win the election because Georgia had kind of like an electoral college system based around the counties.
Right.
And so you had to win a majority of the vote in each county. Now, some counties might not have but 100 people voting versus the city of Atlanta, that had thousands of voting, or like in Columbus. So, and see, the Black people were more in the cities, and the progressive whites were in the cities.
Right.
And, the conservatives, right-wingers were in these little small counties. And Georgia has 159 counties, I think more than any other state, maybe not more than California and Texas, I don't know. But so this guy didn't win. This right-winger Klansman named Eugene Talmadge won a majority of the counties.
And then he won because he did not get the popular vote.
No, he won. Yeah, but he won the primary, which means that he won the general election.
Oh boy. Okay.
Now, and during the primary time, he was like very virile. He said that Negroes better not be voting. This is white people's primary and not for Negroes, even though the Supreme Court had ruled in the opposite way. Now I'm going somewhere with this story. The good thing about his name was Eugene Talmadge. The good thing about him is that his old racist behind died that December, so he didn't get a chance to take office.
Oh God. Oh,
so but sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways, right? So anyway, let's fast forward. That was 1946. June 1946. Let us fast forward to June 1966. I'm going to tie in something so you can see how this thing is working and what else is at work in this story that I had to research. My grandmother doesn't write it into the story. I had to research. So June 16, 1966 was when Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, he was Stokely then, went to Greenwood, Mississippi for a youth rally, for SNCC.
And that's when Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Yes. And that's when he introduced this concept of Black Power. And we were watching TV. My grandmother was living with us in Atlanta by this time because she was supposed to be, quote, senile. And we were sitting there watching the nightly news, and Stokely, and it's a story about Stokely, and he's sweating, and you know how Stokely was very, and he said, Black Power. What do we want? Black Power. What do we want? And the people said, Black Power. When do we want it? Now. What do you want? Black Power. I mean, it was like, whoa. Because in 1966, the average Negro did not want to be called black. Okay? Right. They'd cut your head off if you call them black. You better call me a Negro or colored. All right? Black was a nasty word.
Right.
So grandmama saw it, and we were just kind of shocked, because I was a good little Negro at that time. And so my grandmother got up from where we were sitting, and she started walking down the hallway to her room. And then she turned around and came back, and she started talking. She wasn't talking to anybody in particular, but I was the closest one. I was a teenager then. I was the closest one. And she said, we went to the rally, and Talmadge came out. Talmadge was there, and he was speaking. And he said the only difference between a cow and a nigger gal is a number of tits.
This is what your grandmother told you?
Yes. It just came out. And what I realized is that hearing Stokely make such an impassioned plea for Black dignity, for our dignity as a people, and let's get out of this color thing, like despising our color, despising even the word Black, that it released this memory in her. Now, I said I was a teenager, dumb, young and dumb. I didn't ask her for any more details. She was supposed to be senile. She wasn't supposed to know nothing. No way. But I never forgot what she said. And when I was researching her story, I kept wondering, like, can I make anything? I just always went like, was that real? Where did it come from? Whatever. Well, when I got her memoir, there was also a stack of 50 letters in the with the memoir, and these were letters that she had written to her sons. And there was one letter in there that I hadn't paid attention to, all the years I'd been looking at it, and I was rereading it last year. And she wrote this letter to her son in New York, and apparently he had written to her in June of 1946 to ask if she had voted.
Hmm.
And she said, yes, I voted, but I did not vote for Talmadge. And she went on to say why, but the masses wanted him, and that's all that counts. And she just said, Georgia's just going to burn up like Sodom and Gomorrah because this place is sick. Essentially, that was her thing. It's a sick place, with all this racism. And I said, gee, I wonder did Talmadge come to Columbus? Because she lived in Columbus, Georgia, still that's southwest Georgia. And I went to the historical newspapers, and bam, sure enough, Talmadge had come to Georgia, to Columbus on June 13th, 1946, and had a political rally. And all I could think was, I'm sure since they had the right to vote now in the primary, that my grandmother and some other Black people just went to the rally, to assert their presence, that we're coming to here and we can vote. And I'm sure that's when he must have made that awful statement.
Right.
That was, and he said it on purpose, to demean them. I mean, like, it's not in the newspaper article, of course they wouldn't report something
like that. Right.
Like that. Very interesting so my grandmother also in the letter, for the first time in her life, says that she's sick of Georgia and she wants to be with people who have good common sense. So she said, I think I'll try my luck in California. Now, this is somebody who was born in 1881. She has lived her whole life in South Georgia, always against Black migration out of the South. But it's so much happening. The Black soldiers have come back from World War II. And in that general area, there have been lynchings. There was a Black, I don't have his name right here in front of me, but a Black vet from World War II who was overseas was lynched for voting in the primary. 2 Black couples were together and they were lynched on a bridge. All this is happening around, so it's it's an unbelievable moment, Amelia.
Right.
That here it is that these Black soldiers have come back from the war. Black women have sacrificed, like people on the ration, like everything was being rationed, food and supplies and stuff. Everybody has been caught up in this joint effort to ensure victory overseas against Nazism, against fascism. And then when they come back home and they want to exercise their democratic right to vote, lynched, beaten, like those are just the ones that you know about. I mean, that because like everything, you're an attorney, every crime doesn't get reported.
Right.
So these are the ones that got reported.
Let me ask you this, because I remember you also, your sense of the book was that your grandmother was always, in your words, in search for home.
Yeah.
And you said that your grandmother's mother died under some pretty horrific circumstances, correct?
Yes. When my grandmother was 7, again, we're talking about rural Georgia, and people used to make fires. Now, it was not unusual for people to get burned by fire, because they were making fires outside, inside, and all of that. So her mother was washing clothes, so she had make this fire outside, get the hot water, I guess putting the clothes in there, and she stumbled and fell into the fire and died. I don't know how long she lingered, but my grandmother was only 7 years old when this happened. So she had a little brother who was 2. And her daddy was a sharecropping. He was a farmer. And there was just no way for this man to work a farm and take care of 2 little children.
Right.
So he took the children to the mother's parents who were on the same farm, sharecropping farm. And they were also emancipated people, but they were like close to 50. But that was old then, because the average lifespan of a Black person then in 1890 was 35 years old.
What?
So they had already outlived 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And so as she writes in the memoir,
Mm-hmm.
she mentions her mother sometimes, but not often.
Mm-hmm.
But she keeps talking about, I'm looking for home.
Mm-hmm.
And, it took me a long time to get it. I guess I was just kind of slow on this, that, if you lose your mother at a young age, I mean, even as an adult, that's devastating.
Oh,
You can be 60 years old and lose your mother. That's about how old I was when my mother died.
Yeah.
It's devastating because your mother is the source of identity.
Right.
And that's home.
Right.
That's home. And so then I realized that that's why my grandmother named her story This Way Leads Home. That throughout her life, she was looking to find that presence of her mother. She had a very good substitute, if you will, with her grandparents, the mother's parents.
Mm-hmm.
They were the most fabulous grandparents you could ever imagine. Her grandfather was a sharecropper.
Mm-hmm.
And she said he could pick 500 pounds of cotton a day, when the harvest time came. And he was also a community healer. Somebody told me that my medical doctors from down that area, he said they called them, fire doctors. They called them fire doctors because they knew how to mix herbs and stuff to draw inflammation out.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's who he was. And then her grandmother had been one of the sewing ladies during slavery time. So she taught my grandmother how to sew, which became her profession, like one of her professions when she grew up. And my grandmother taught my mother and the other daughter. My mama kind of half taught me. I don't sew. I did learn, the basics, but I didn't practice it. So it's interesting, how these skills, because my aunt did become a professional seamstress. And so that's a skill that was passed down from her great grandmother. So it's like from her great grandmother to her mother, and then she practiced it. So, but it is this longing, this searching, and it led me to have to do some deeper reflection on myself and just seeing who I am, because I came of age in a very transitional period. Like I said, June 16, 1966, Stokely Carmichael introduces this utterly radical, unheard of idea of Black power.
Right.
That's an oxymoron in 1966.
Exactly. Yep.
A total contradiction of terms. Ain't no power associated with nothing Black.
Right.
And Stokely put it out there, and that just began, then the Afro was coming in, and he started saying Black is beautiful, and when we started searching for our African roots, because then it's like, I'm not a Negro anymore. I was very comfortable being a Negro.
Right.
Growing up.
I hear you. With
very
Ebony and Jet publications.
Yeah, very comfortable with that. But after 1966, after Stokely blew it wide open, and let me challenge you on something right now, Amelia. That date, June 16th, does it resonate anything in you?
Isn't
does
that
it conjure up?
Juneteenth?
Does it conjure up something important in you? That date?
Is it Juneteenth related? Or is
No.
it June 19th?
No.
Then no, because I'm 66. I was probably 10 years old.
Oh,
10 years
okay.
old. Yeah, I was 10 years old. But I do remember.
When I say it, you're going to know it.
Okay.
June 16th, 1976. The Soweto Uprising. Exactly 10 years.
Okay.
To the day that Stokely rattled America. Youth in Soweto, South Africa, came out with Black consciousness influenced by the Black Power movement of America. Now, they didn't choose that date.
Oh, that was very strategic, you think, huh?
No, I think it just happened. No, it just happened because in that moment, the white minority government had issued an edict saying that they were not going to teach Black African kids in English anymore.
Right.
The views
And
expressed
they
on this
said,
program are not necessarily
We're going to need to cut. We're going to need to wrap up.
Oh, the time is up already?
Yeah. Okay. So hold on a sec. What I want to do is we're going to continue with this conversation because there's a lot to delve into. One of the things we talked about was coming of age and so forth. So our guest today was Paula Matabane. She is a itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, formerly professor at Howard University School of Communications. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good day.
The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.